Thanks, Count Corla. People Before Profit will be opposing the government motion on the Migration and Asylum Pact and that pact itself, not for the reasons that some in this House may put forward, but because we believe that the European Union and sadly our own government are now beginning to make concessions to anti-immigrant hysteria and to the scapegoating of immigrants by the far right in a dangerous way, and in a way that isn't prompted by a desire for a more humane system, but in fact is going to result in a less humane and less fair system of international protection and asylum. The criticisms of the Migration Pact from those who are genuinely concerned with human rights and with giving people a fair hearing have been well articulated, and I'm sure the Minister is more than familiar with them. What we're actually going to see is, for example, fast-track approaches dealing with people who come from so-called safe countries. Now, if you take even the most cursory look at countries that are being designated, and I just spent my time as I was listening to the debate here, looking at it, you look at countries, almost all of the countries that have been designated as so-called safe countries, when you look at what human rights organisations are saying about those countries, you see very, very serious problems indeed, which would lead one to understand immediately that there would be very, very legitimate reasons for people fleeing those countries. I looked, for example, at the Amnesty report on Algeria, which has been designated as a safe country, and what do you see in recent times? You see journalists arrested, detained, human rights organisations shut down, opposition political parties shut down and banned, people being arrested, and so on. So of course there will be good reasons why people might flee countries like that. And you can go through the list of all of them. What the new pact will also mean is people who are lodging appeals against decisions can actually be deported while they're awaiting appeals, the legal grounds for greater levels of detention of people making asylum applications. So there are major, major problems, but of course all of this is underpinned by our own government and the European establishment leaning into the scare tactics and hysteria that are being whipped up by the right and the far right, essentially adopting Tory tactics, and it surely should be something of a lesson to an Irish government when you look at the Tory government who have relied on the scapegoating and attacking of immigrants and are now just about to be swept out of power because everybody in Britain finally understood that all these attacks on immigrants and asylum seekers were the Tories' desperate attempt to deflect attention away from the real issues that people have a right to be angry about, on the cost of living, on the housing crisis, on the lack of public services, and so on. But instead of addressing those issues, we scapegoat vulnerable people who are fleeing war, persecution, oppression, or who are just looking for a better life. And what really worries me from government interventions and indeed from some of the opposition interventions is that language of a burden, suggesting that human beings, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about human beings, that somehow they are a burden. The reality is that human beings generate all of the wealth, all of the richness of our society. The vast, vast majority of human beings, wherever they are from, whatever colour or creed they are, enrich our society. They make it better. They add to our society economically and culturally. And indeed, anybody who thinks there's some sort of ideal Irish purity should just think about it for a little while. When you go back to the 50s and the 40s and the 30s in this country, when masses of people were leaving the country, did reducing the population of this country make it better? No, it made it poorer, it made it worse. And of course, it was a period characterised by the Magdalen laundries, by the industrial schools, by the shocking treatment of women, by the shocking treatment of children who weren't born in, supposedly legitimate family relations, and all of this horrible stuff. Or the idea that Ireland is full. I mean, it's ridiculous. There were 8 million people in this country at the beginning of the 19th century. Now, unless people are going to suggest that the famine that was enforced on the Irish population by the British government, which halved the population, was somehow a necessary thing to reduce the population, which I don't think any sane person would say, the reality is the reduction of our population led us to be a much poorer country. And decades and generations of emigration made this country a poorer place at every single level. And you even just look at the basic thing of population density. The Netherlands is 2/3 the size of this country, and it is a population of, I was just looking at this before the debate, a population of 17 million. Where, in fact, Switzerland, similarly, less than 2/3 the size of this country, a population of 8.7 million. These are wealthy countries. So the idea that low population density somehow is good economically is simply not true. And you look at the tax contribution of immigrants in this country, you look at our health services, where there are, 51,000 non-EU citizens working in our health services at the moment, 36,000 working in information and communication, 24,000 in industry, 24,000 in hospitality, 20,000 in professional and scientific, 17,000 in wholesale and retail, 13,000 in administrative services, 11,000 in financial services, 34,000 in other areas like agriculture and so on. Literally, our economy would collapse without the contribution of immigrants. And surely we should know that as a country who helped build other countries. And we face the same racist scapegoating to the far right, and now sadly our own government are echoing when we went to those countries. The divide and rule tactics that were used by successive Tory and British governments against Irish immigrants, which was actually a weapon to divide the British working class and distract from their own failings to provide things for ordinary working people in Britain, and the Irish and black people were used as scapegoats, and now we're leaning into the European leaders and the Irish government. Roderick, you're shaking your head. Look at the amount of measures that have been taken in the last few weeks faced into an election, all directed at sending signals that the government is getting tough on immigration, that it's a burden that has to be addressed and so on. The problem in this country isn't immigrants. The problem is failure of successive governments to address the housing and accommodation crisis, to properly resource and staff our health service, to address the problem of the lack of GPs, and so on, and critically, to distribute the enormous wealth that exists in this country, where 10% of the population own 57% of the wealth. Ireland has never been richer, but nor has it ever been more unequal in terms of the concentration of wealth. We have more than enough resources and wealth to solve the problems. And when you talk to people, because the vast majority of people in this country are absolutely not racist, they are welcoming, decent people, but they are frustrated about the lack of GP services, the fact that their daughter or son is on a housing waiting list for 10 or 15 years, or they go to the health, to go into the emergency department and find that they're on trolleys for hours or even days. They're angry about that, but of course some people want to suggest that it's immigrants when in fact it's immigrants we need. I mean, we've labour and skills shortages in almost every area. We're lacking taxi drivers, I was listening to on the radio today. We're lacking bus drivers, we're lacking people in retail, we're lacking people in the health service, we're lacking people in construction. So the idea that Ireland is full, or that immigrants won't do anything other than help us solve the problems that need to be solved as a matter of urgency. And that's the truth we should be telling people, and governments should be acknowledging their failure to address those things, but not leaning into the scapegoating of immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, or whatever they might be. Human beings enrich our society. They make it better. They are not a drain. We need people, just as the world benefited from Irish people going to countries all over the world. We benefit from immigrants. We shouldn't scapegoat them, and we should reject the attempt of the European Union or our government to do it. Let's address the real problems and admit our responsibility for failing to deliver to solve those problems up until now.